Romans chapter 1, verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature has been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish hearts was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of a corruptible man, and of birds, and four-footed animals, and crawling creatures. Right there. So last week in Romans, we talked about the righteousness of God. That was pretty much what we talked about last week.
What was your definition? I wasn't here.
Pardon?
I wasn't here last week. What was your definition?
Of righteousness of God?
Of righteousness. It was a cliffhanger.
State of being or something.
Right, the state of being, the state of how you are with God.
How you are.
Right. So we were starting to talk about the wrath of God, and I asked the question, well, what is the word wrath? Did you guys study up on it? I knew you would.
I don't remember the question you asked me.
It shows you the impact right there. So what is wrath? This word wrath. Just get the dictionary definition.
I always assumed it was had a negative connotation. In other words, punishment. His anger, out of context, to me, wrath was his anger, whether it's justified or not.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying, getting out of context here. But
What about the dictionary definition?
I got the footnote definition.
And what's the footnote?
It says God's wrath is his righteousness and just retribution against sin.
retribution.
It's
another
Yeah, I
like
stuttered on that one too.
Yeah.
I was expecting it to be some retaliation.
Yeah, but the wrath of man and the wrath of God are two different things.
Oh, absolutely.
The wrath of man is emotional hatred, anger for whatever reason, selfishness, where God is a righteous vengeance and anger.
Right.
There's a reason why he's not doing it because I'm mad at you in a sense emotionally. This is judgment because you rejected me. You rejected my substitute of sin. You rejected every. That's what's so cool. Most believers do not separate the two. We think of wrath. Howard's mad at me, he's lashing out. No, that's not God. Because if that's the case, guess what? All of us wouldn't make it out of here because even though we still sin. We still sin. And he doesn't take his wrath because of our faith in the resurrection of Christ.
Yeah, one comment.
Something. You have to go a long way before he acts on some things. But you look at the flood, that was, I think, his wrath in a way.
Yeah.
Sodom and Gomorrah, that was like, okay, I've had enough. Boom.
So
Look at Israel and Babylon.
John, that made me think of a good point. Our wrath, or what we would maybe say anger, is based on emotion,
Yep.
and his is based on righteousness.
Yep.
So
But there's still levels of it. You kind of mentioned it when you said, Sodom and Gomorrah, I've had enough. When do you, I'm thinking of us with kids or grandkids, you know how that relationship. Sometimes you guide them, you may, kind of bat them a little bit. You might encourage them, you might fuss at them, you might take away something or sit them in a corner. But then when they, straw that broke the camel's back, you lose it, shut off the TV, put them in the room. You may want to do more, but you ramp it up. So there's levels. And to me, wrath is not just God going, come on, son, it's the proverbial bat in the back of the head. You've gotten to that stage. It's a level thing.
No, it's not. Not in this sense. What is he talking about here? About salvation.
Yeah.
There is no There is no degree.
No, I'm
No,
not
if you're not,
arguing that.
that's what I'm saying. This is, okay, we're talking about wrath within this context. He's not talking about, this context is all about salvation. Okay, you want to reject me, you want to be an idol worshiper? There is no degree, no, you're cut off.
Yeah.
You want to follow me through the death, burial, and resurrection, your sin has been covered, taken away, you're in my family. I get what you're saying, but in this context, Paul's talking about salvation, and that's important because most people want to go to that, and I get it. We can talk about it in the Old
No,
Testament.
I'm not arguing, that's what I'm saying, it's not
So it's
encouraging
important,
this
yeah, but I'm
verse.
talking about, but this context in Romans, the people would go there, but like, no, this context is about salvation, y'all. There is no middle ground. It's either all or nothing. You follow Christ or you don't. There is no other payment for sin. So I think that's what's important. This context here is about salvation. And God's wrath is, oh, you want to reject my son? There's going to be retribution, and there's no middle ground. I get what you're saying, but in this context, we got to be careful.
So, I wanted to touch back on what Frank had mentioned about the timing and how long it takes God to apply wrath on it. And it occurred to me that while it would appear that God's timing of wrath or the execution of wrath may be a very long time, I guess one of the comparisons is for man, we don't take a lot of time to apply our wrath, right? It's the rapid slap on the back of the head, type of thing.
It took, I think Noah was 120 years he built the ark.
Before the wrath, the flood.
Yep.
You
I
mean
mean,
what
he
you're
was
saying?
built, right. I think one of the things they mentioned was somebody called in and asked, there was no Christians at that time. I mean, not Christians, but nobody in the whole world but Moses believed in God. I mean, Noah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they were saying that they had 120 years
To get to know.
yeah.
The dictionary definition, just to get to that. The emotional response to perceived wrong and injustice, often translated as anger, indignation, and irritation. So there is, this is the dictionary definition, not
Yeah.
the biblical application here.
Yeah.
I just want to get us to understand the word itself and what it is, because if we can't agree to the word definition, it's going to be very difficult because we'll all come from different angles here.
But the key word they started right off the bat, the first word in there is emotion.
Emotional, right.
And, I mean, you nail it, but does God have an emotion?
It is an interesting question.
We're images
I
of
mean,
God,
we
so I would
see
say
the word-
yes.
Well, yeah, okay, fair enough.
We see his description all the time.
Yeah.
God is pleased. God is, anger on this.
Love is an
So,
emotion, right?
I mean, I could be ticked off a day, but that doesn't mean I'm mad. What I love about God is he could be mad, but he can hold back his emotions. He's God.
Yeah.
And say, okay, I'm not, it's like when we just with our kids, we're supposed to wait.
right.
Let me calm down, because right now my emotions will take over. I think God just does it on the supreme level. I
Right.
would have to believe, I would hope.
God is counting, Millennium 1.
Yeah.
Millennium 2, Millennium 3.
Millennium one.
Different kind of counting scheme
Yeah.
here.
Amen.
Yeah, true. It talks about God versus man here. God's wrath is always holy and justified. Man is never holy and rarely justified.
That was also in the dictionary?
No, that part's not. That's complicated. That was
Read all the things that make
That was
it-
Howard's interpretation right there.
But you know what I would like to say? I would hope and pray this, that and I would say as a non-believer, I would agree with that. But I would have to say as a believer, because of the transformation of your heart, I would hope, because of our heart transformation, it would flip-flop. I would have to say now, my anger is less, and my acting out on my anger is a lot less.
Yeah.
So I get a non-believer. I would say when I was a non-believer, look, I was rough.
Oh, yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I really very rarely act out on my anger, and
Yeah.
that's a good thing. That's what's supposed to happen to us.
It's
So
one
I
of
would
the-
kind of look at it from a non-believer standpoint, and as a believer, as we grow in Christ.
In one of my key points of my walk in Christ, an event happened at work, and I responded poorly, as I look back on it now. And my boss came, and had me sit in his office, kind of one of those kind of things. And his first words out of his mouth, "Howard, I thought you were a Christian." Bam, bam, right there. And
Your response was?
you're right, I am unholy and unclean. Where's the lamb so I can go sacrifice it? I'm dead. So, anyways, okay. Other things about wrath, wrath of God.
Now, I think when you read, especially, well, we're in the New Testament now, but when you read the Old Testament, God's wrath, in some cases, depending upon who his wrath was poured out on, was poured out for different reasons, right? And for his people, his wrath was meant to bring them back to him. Like what he did with Israel and allowing them to go into exile was so that they would turn and come back, right? But then we see his wrath poured out on ungodly nations where it was just meant to wipe them out. So I think it depends upon the situation and how God's wrath is actually applied, I guess would be the best way to look at it.
But you know what, that's a great point. That's why we can sit back and as we look into the future, I'm comfortable with him making a decision and everything.
Yeah.
Because that does make it, when you put it all together, that's why as a believer I say, I'm comfortable with God making a decision on whatever it is as far as relationships and what's going to happen once I pass away and leave. That's a good point.
Because Jay, you were talking about the whole idea of that with our grandchildren or children out there, sometimes we're using punishment to guide them, right? Which is, we had talked about it before, the whole idea of the good shepherd that using the rod, right? The rod was not to beat with, the rod was to guide with. Right. So it's that guidance. But they had an instrument that they would use when the sheep got in deep, deep trouble, right? And they would have to beat and hook and pull, which was a different type of tool that they used to do that. And I think God does that with us. He allows different things in our life, but it's never an anger thing. It's always trying to call us back, to get us back to, where we can live and be the disciples that he wants us to be and the witnesses that he wants us to be.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of Old Testament, let's Psalm 78. 78:56. I'm waiting on Steve. He's got a turbo finger. Okay. Psalm 78:56 through 60.
I can read it. Yet they tested and rebelled against the Most High God and did not keep his testimonies, but burned away and acted treacherously like their fathers. They twisted like a deceitful bow, for they provoked him to anger with their high places. They moved him to jealousy with their idols. When God heard, he was full of wrath, and he utterly rejected Israel. How far?
To 60.
60. For he forsook his dwelling at Shiloh, the tent where he dwelt among mankind.
Stop right there, yeah. So you can see that, and these words of he was greatly abhorred is mine of Israel. It was at such a point of treacherousness.
That's close enough.
That it did bring God to wrath. So we see God's wrath in the Old Testament all over the place with it.
But what's funny? This is a great. I didn't know this, but look at this. How did he reject them? Look at the lad. He just, in a sense, he pulled his tent away. No, his protection person. Look, I'm out of here. You want to live on? You want to worship these idols? Let them take care of you for a little while.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal when you think about it as a believer. It's like the parallels.
I think of how scary.
They'll never do that to us.
How scary it would be. Imagine if the Holy Spirit left us.
That's it.
Today. I don't know about you guys, but just all of mankind, I literally would fall apart. I personally think so.
There's an interesting thing that we've been reading in Ezekiel, in our reading through the Bible chronologically, but in Ezekiel it talks about, Ezekiel has a vision of God's presence, that what you just read, the presence of God leaving the temple, but then he has a vision of the presence of God coming into Babylon, where the people had gone into exile. So it's removal of the ungodliness from the nation, but never removing his presence from his people.
Always
Yeah,
had a
always
remnant.
had a
huh?
remnant.
Sounds, always had a
Always
remnant.
had a
Isn't that
remnant,
remarkable?
yeah.
Always had a remnant.
And so wrath of God is not just an Old Testament. I guess is my point here is that it doesn't apply just to the Old Testament. We see it in the New Testament, obviously right here. If we jump just slightly ahead to Romans chapter 2, we see 5 and 6. But because of your stubbornness and unrepentant heart, you are storing up wrath for yourself. Storing up. Oof. In the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God, who will render every man according to his deeds, which is a quote from the Old Testament. This day of wrath. It's that long coming. That coming is coming. There is a day of wrath, and I think we need to be clear to people that just because God didn't strike you in a lightning right now at this moment doesn't mean you won't.
Well, even if he doesn't, you die. I mean, see, here's the key.
Yeah.
We always want to think about now.
Yeah.
What about, what I look at the afterlife,
Yeah.
because there is no second chance. You know, that's what, and people need to read that verse and understand. We're not talking about, oh, I lied yesterday. No, we're talking about you reject the
Right.
sacrifice of Christ. I didn't get him a performance, I'm not going to keep him a performance. But you're right, think about forever. This is a short period of time.
And then even 50 years is a short period of time.
Yes.
Think about what you did as a teenager. And, you know, the impact that had on you and the decision you made there affected where you are now. And we're at a good place now, so, you know, it's tainted that way. But all the people making these decisions that I've seen over and over, these kids, it all goes back to the decision they made in junior high. You know, which crowd to hang with, what drugs to get into, or whatever, and they just never recovered from that.
You know, again, but we need to, again, I like to always go a step further when I talk to kids, especially kids. Christ is a new life.
Right.
We need to, because we always want to focus on drugs. And let's forget about that. Let me tell you about Christ, is what he's going to do for you. And they're going to say, well, I still want to do this. Okay, let's get over that. I like you said, he changes your want to. That was your favorite. I love it. That's what, we don't push that enough. I tell people, don't worry about this. It's not, you don't clean up and then come to Jesus. No, you come to him with a total trust. Oh, it may take a little time on some people, but he's going to change you from the inside out. So I think we need to understand that, yeah, there's repercussions, but let's talk about the new life he's going to give you. That is phenomenal. I mean, to me, we need to get back to that. That's what Christ said. I come to give you life, give you a life abundantly. Wow. That's awesome.
All right. So get past this first 5 words in the verse. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. Why did he use those 2 words, ungodliness and unrighteousness? Was he just trying to clarify, or what's the deal with that? Ungodliness relates to God, and unrighteousness relates to men, to what you do to other men. So ungodliness is what you do against God. And this unrighteousness is the unrighteousness of men, of men's unrighteousness, if you will. So he's covering both spectrums, if you will. Okay.
You're right. Because look at the next verse.
Yeah.
You suppressed it because of your unrighteousness. I love it. I didn't look at that before.
Right.
You suppressed the truth. That's what
Because
you're
you
doing to
suppressed
other
the truth.
people. That's a good point. I never thought about
And
that.
so why is that number one? I mean, couldn't Paul have gone, the wrath of God is revealed, go to 19, because of what is, he could have gone further, but he started with, at the very top, the order of importance
Yes.
is suppress the truth. What is this suppress the truth?
Well, this whole idea is that wrath of God is not, it's, in this context, the wrath of God is not being poured out because you're ignorant.
Correct.
It's being poured out because you're intentional
Intentional
Yeah.
to suppress.
to suppress, right? This is, when God poured out his wrath on Israel, he didn't pour them out because they were ignorant. He poured them out because they knew exactly what they were doing.
Yeah.
And they knew exactly who he was, and they chose to to do otherwise.
I think that's huge. Because I mean, when you think of the punishment, whether it's kids or whether it's someone who's not always there, you know, and that's where I think God takes care of, I use old terms, retarded kids, I don't know what the right term is nowadays.
I'll add it to it.
Yeah, there's always different.
Yeah, I get reprimanded, because I say, I don't
Because
mean
they don't know
negative,
any
you're right.
better. I mean, I've got my son's brother-in-law has got some syndrome, it's kind of like, Downs, but it's different.
They're slow.
Yeah, but he's really,
Good point.
he can't take care of himself. And he's 30-ish, I don't know exactly, bigger than I am, big boy. But he's like a 2-year-old. And there's no way he can understand, you know, this, no matter what. He can talk about, well, he doesn't really talk much at all, but he knows about God and all that. But he doesn't understand. God takes care of those people. But then there's the intention. You know, when someone accidentally does something, is one thing, they don't know any better, or they're just too hyper or focused on something else. But when a kid looks at you and still goes like that, that's an intention.
Yeah.
And that's where I think God has no patience for.
Right.
This is exactly what he's talking about here. You're looking at me in the eye and doing it, as opposed to accidentally doing it or not paying attention.
But then you're also encouraging the guy that you poked to poke the next guy.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's part of this whole idea of why God pours out his wrath, is he's gonna put an end to it,
Right.
you know?
Let's break that cycle.
So what kind of suppression of truth is it? What types of suppression? Let's first talk about back then. Keep this in context real quick.
Yeah. Suppress the truth of righteousness and unrighteousness.
So what were they doing?
We're about to read about it.
Yeah.
Say it again.
We're about to read about it.
We're about to read about it. The spoiler is there.
But they had other gods. They were attributing other things to the other gods that they made up.
What were they doing overtly? They arrested Paul.
Oh, well, yeah, okay.
Okay, they were killing Christians. They were overtly, casting people out of their society by dare to say that there is a God and there's only one God and all that. That's the overtness of it. It wasn't we just won't say anything, that kind of thing. It was a very overtness to it.
And what's the truth? That key word is truth. I mean, the revelation of God is for Jesus Christ. Again, we gotta this is not a play-by-play, we gotta believe what was going on in the conversation. The truth is Christ was the Son of God, he was the Messiah, he died, down the list, that's the truth if you look at all the first 17 verses. So I think key word is truth. Who's true? Christ is truth.
Right.
What they had to go off of what the prophets had said in the past. And here you got John the Baptist saying to, I think the people, the Pharisees said, who are you to run away from the wrath of God, you vipers? There's a bunch of places where they should know that the Messiah is coming, and they should know that he is there by the outcry of the people. I mean, of God's people when he chose to make
Well, it goes, you're right, keep going. Think about this. When Christ just come up and say, I'm the Son of God.
Right.
No, he was healing the sick. He was casting out demons. He was calming chaos of the sea on a boat. He was doing all these miraculous things. If you go to the Old Testament, especially in Psalms, it talks about what would the Messiah be. He would be almost like David, where in his kingship, where he can control the things. And back then, only a king of divine, to a certain degree, could do this. No one else could. So that's what's important. Christ says, hey, trust me. Look what he told the Pharisees, of the works I do. That's awesome.
So do you think this
That's
suppression
the
of the
suppression
truth?
part right there, is where they're keeping that away from the people
Right.
to benefit themselves.
Right.
Well, and when Christ was being crucified, or before he was crucified, and I don't know who was the main person that said, "What is truth?"
Pontius Pilate.
Pontius Pilate, and it's truth standing right in the
It
face.
is.
That's right. Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
Don't mess with this man.
And they didn't
This
have
white
communication methods in those days. I mean, it was all verbal. They didn't have newspapers and internet and everything else. So it was word of mouth.
Spread like wildfire.
And so that word of mouth is called testimonies.
Yes.
And you'll see that all in the Old Testament, that you have violated the testimonies of God. We use it nowadays, in the New Testament, we use the word gospel. Because that is the testimony. Remember, gospel is not just good news, it is events. It's recounting the events of what Christ did, death, burial, and resurrection. And that's what they were suppressing, was this testimony of the death, burial, and resurrection.
But when you start saying, I do the work of my Father, and you start putting yourself with God, deity, boy, that's what really
Right.
kind
I ticked them off a little bit.
of, yeah.
They didn't like
They
that.
didn't like that for me.
We have to stop here.
What?
It's time. Shoot.
Next week.
And so 19 says because, and so we'll have to see what is the cause of because. Why are we there? Okay, so we'll start at 19. Sorry, guys. I'll let you go too far. All right. Don't, yeah, go ahead and read ahead. It's okay. Yeah. We need to stop here. So what are you guys praying for?